Resident Evil 9 is close, like really close. So today I want to talk about some of this franchise's amazing groundbreaking history and its absolute refusal to die, along with some of my hopes and predictions for RE9. Resident Evil is a franchise that's had its ups, downs, movies, and remakes. And you'd think that it'd be well oversaturated by now, but somehow it's not. This series put survival horror on the map, and holds the Guinness World Record for the worst video game dialogue. And yeah, we love it anyway. It came out swinging in 1996 with fixed cameras, tank controls, and limited saves. Sure, it wasn't the first survival horror game, but it was the first to define the genre and bring it into the mainstream, inspiring games like Silent Hill, Alone in the Dark, and Fatal Frame. And then a few years later, Resident Evil 4 changed the landscape of gaming, popularizing the over-the-shoulder camera and influencing even more games like Dead Space, Gears of War, and The Last of Us. All of this just to prove one thing: Resident Evil isn't just iconic, it's foundational. Resident Evil originally designed its horror around limitation. Your ammo, saves, and resources were all finite, forcing you to really weigh your options with enemies, and managing your resources, ensuring that you had enough supplies for whatever you may or may not encounter. And even if you did end up killing an enemy, they would just come back more dangerous than before, truly making combat a risk, not a reward. Along with the uncomfortable fixed camera angles hiding danger, which was ultimately due to the weaker hardware at the time not being powerful enough to render true 3D environments, which just made everything more uncomfortable. Think about it. In modern 3D games, you could just spin the camera to see around a corner. In Resident Evil 1, you have to walk into the unknown. The creators knew exactly where you were looking. They could hide a zombie just off screen or use a low angle to make a hallway feel even more claustrophobic. It was brilliant. A couple years later, and Capcom had felt that they'd been making the same type of game. They wanted their next installment to truly feel next-gen on the newly released consoles. They needed to stop relying on 2D pre-rendered backgrounds and take some big swings. So they went from the classic fixed camera angles to an over-the-shoulder point of view, which way back in 2005 was a very rare, unique move to make. Most third-person games at the time used a loose floating camera that followed a couple feet behind the character, so having a very tight, off-centered, over-the-shoulder angle was certainly a risk. It's one of those rare moments in tech history where one design choice was so clearly superior that almost everyone else stopped what they were doing and copied it, fundamentally changing how action games were made for the next 2 decades. Resident Evil 4 didn't evolve horror, it rewrote it. By having the camera so close to Leon's shoulder, Capcom closed the gap between the immersion of a first-person shooter and the character-driven feel of a third-person game. Along with that, they introduced a locational damage system that truly changed how players interacted with enemies. Aiming became intentional. It was designed so that shooting specific body parts triggered unique animations and advantages, like shooting the feet to slow an enemy down, or shooting the hands to disarm them. It was revolutionary. The horror was through the pressure of the game, not helplessness. A couple years later, Capcom found themselves in the same situation again. They had made multiple identical games and were starting to fall out of relevancy. They needed to pivot, and that's exactly what they did. Resident Evil 7 came out as a very immersive, horror-first, straight-up scary game.
What the fucking fuck?
Letting action and combat take a back seat. And with the slower pace and the first-person perspective, it really worked. A little too well, even. They got widespread feedback from players who found it so intense that they were either too stressed to finish it or too intimidated to even start, forcing them to make Resident Evil 8 much less cramped and intimate. And while this first-person era isn't my favorite, I still respect it a lot. And at the same time they were pumping these out, they released some remakes of the classic games, keeping people like me satisfied while pushing the overarching story along. Resident Evil survives because it refuses to stay comfortable. And here we are, mere days until Resident Evil 9, and I feel like Capcom is gearing up to switch up the franchise yet again. From the trailers alone, the game is looking like a hybrid between the horrifying, rural, and claustrophobic first-person games, and the action, combat-based third-person games, which is sick, especially if Leon's parts are more like the classic games and Grace's parts like the newer ones. But that also kinda worries me, because the content and overall vibe of the game being switched too much is sure to break me out of any kind of immersion and become a little annoying, especially on replays. And you know exactly what I mean if you've played Ashley's segments in Resident Evil 4. But I feel like they've got this. I mean, this is the 9th mainline game. I have faith that this is going to be the first entry that truly blends the first-person immersion with the over-the-shoulder control in a meaningful way. Not just switching perspectives, but designing encounters around both. And with the newer zombies no longer being infected by the T-virus, I'm hoping that they behave a little differently. Still classic zombie DNA, but I think a variety would work really well. Kinda like The Last of Us. Some that stalk and hide, and some that are super aggressive and charge you. Not just aimless Minecraft zombies. But I think Resident Evil works best when its characters feel grounded, even when everything around them is completely absurd. That's why Resident Evil 2 worked so well. It wasn't about saving the world, it was about a rookie cop on his first day, and a college student looking for her brother, trapped in a city falling apart. The stakes were massive, but the story was personal. You felt the outbreak because you were experiencing it through Leon and Claire, not through some over-the-top action spectacle. And that's what I'm hoping Resident Evil 9 understands. Not just bigger enemies and set pieces, but characters in a story we actually care about.